Let's talk about wounded feminine energy. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I had a topic request to talk about wounded feminine energy and addiction. I want to start out by saying that addiction is a very sensitive subject. I am not a trained, licensed addiction specialist or addiction counselor. I've known many people in my lifetime who have dealt with addiction, so I've seen it firsthand. That said, none of this advice is actually a substitution for actual addiction counseling or addiction treatments or anything like that. The things I'm going to touch on are not the here-all, end-all, be-all when it comes to addiction, but there is a connection between wounded feminine energy and addiction problems, and so I want to discuss that in this video. If you're new to my content, I have a lot of videos where I go really in-depth on masculine and feminine energies, but just a brief summary, masculine and feminine energies are energies that live within all of us. We all contain both energies, but we all have a core energy that's the energy we are most ourselves in. That energy often links up with our gender. It doesn't have to, but it often does. And we can be in wounded or healed versions of either of these energies. Because we all contain both energies, we can tap into either of these energies whenever we need to. And it's actually healthy too. If you have a man who's very masculine at his core, it is very healthy for him to have a good connection with his feminine energy so he can tap into the aspects of love and compassion, empathy, things like that. It's also healthy for a very feminine woman to have a healthy connection to her inner masculine so she can actually create direction and structure for herself so she doesn't always have to pass that on to a masculine partner. Now I have a lot of videos going into the details about what these two energies actually entail, but kind of a brief overview. The masculine energy, and that's the masculine in all of us, creates the structure, it creates the direction, it's about discipline, it's about protection, it's about giving, it's about providing, things like that. The feminine in all of us is about love and connection, compassion, empathy, sensuality, pleasure, living the fullness of life. It's a receptive energy. It's about receiving. Now, wounded masculine energy is what I believe most people mean when they talk about toxic masculinity. It's usually when the masculine is coming from ego and he's not coming from soul. He is using his masculine strength to tear people down as opposed to using it for protecting, for providing, for leadership. He's leading from his own ego and leading for his own selfish pursuits and not leading from a place of having a greater purpose, of leading from a place of trying to accomplish a certain task. It's when he doesn't create structure as a way of creating discipline, but he creates structure in a way of controlling and manipulating people. Those are all characteristics of wounded masculine energy. Wounded feminine energy is usually associated with giving away all of your personal power. It is usually a very extreme lack of self-worth, so it's a people pleaser. It's putting your own needs aside and only concerning yourself with the needs of other people. Very often not believing that you are worthy of love, affection, care, compassion. It can become very self-harming because it doesn't actually believe in its own worth. And it also tends to lack any level of discipline whatsoever, so that it can very often turn into being obsessed with pleasure, but obsessed with pleasure to the point of self-harm, like actually trying to hurt yourself with that pleasure. And a lot of this wounding that comes from past traumas or past hurts, or it could even be ancestral stuff, limiting beliefs. I mean, there's so many reasons why people can have inner wounding, and some of this wounding overlaps. It's rare that you have someone who is just solely in one wounding and doesn't have any wounding in another area. You can have people who are in a very healthy connection with their inner masculine, say, but they have a lot of feminine wounding, or you could have people who are wounded in both, or vice versa. I mean, there's so many different aspects to this, and it's not usually a very clear-cut thing. And I would also encourage you to not get too obsessed with the idea of labeling these things. It's really the energy and the feelings and the actions you take that really define what this all is. I really just use these terms because I really find it to be a helpful guideline as a place to start to do the healing work. And there are a lot of different things that people can become addicted to, and the root of those addictions can start from different places. So say if you were a feminine woman and you are completely in your feminine and you have no ability to connect with your inner masculine to create structure and to create safety for yourself, you often outsource that to other people, and you can become very erratic, very chaotic, very undisciplined. And you also then tend to rely on other people to create that discipline and structure for you. So your feminine energy tends to get very wounded. That's when you start giving away your personal power. That's when you start to possibly get into the things that could then become addicting because you have no ability to say, stop drinking when you realize that you've had enough, or things like that, because you haven't created any discipline and structure within yourself. On the flip side, if you are a masculine being and you are solely in your masculine energy and you have no connection to your feminine energy whatsoever, you can often become very cold and very heartless. Feminine energy is about love and compassion, whereas masculine is about discipline and structure. So you can very often become OCD, like you become very obsessive about things because you never actually like stop and enjoy pleasure or things like that. That obsessive need to control and never actually letting yourself say stop and smell the roses or things like that. Like that can lead to some masculine wounding because you end up becoming very cold, very heartless, and you start to disconnect from the natural empathy that happens with other people. It becomes all about you, and you very much can then let your ego take over and your ego take control. I have a whole video where I talk about ego versus soul, so I'm not going to dig into that too much, but a lot of times masculine wounding can come from that ego place of needing to prove yourself or needing to hurt someone else in order to feel good about yourself. And because opposite energies attract sexually, very often wounded opposite energies attract sexually. So very often you see in relationships where you have a partner who is an abuser and somebody who tends to be a victim. Wounded feminine energy tends to be a very victimhood mentality. It's almost like this energy of I don't feel worthy, so I'm going to either hurt myself or let somebody else hurt me. Wounded masculine energy tends to be someone who needs to hurt somebody else to make themselves feel better and feel superior. So you can see why people like that in those two mentalities would then magnetize together. And this is not intended to be victim blaming. I am not at all making excuses for someone being an abuser. I do also think that it is important to take a look at what leads someone to get into a relationship and stay in a relationship with somebody who is an abuser, and working on healing that, because if you don't heal that aspect of you, you're going to continuously keep repeating that pattern of going back to an abuser, which very well could be considered an addiction pattern, where if you don't feel worthy of stepping up and saying I deserve better, you're probably going to repeat the pattern, which does tie into a certain level of addiction. Many of us are addicted to traumatic relationships, difficult relationships, relationships that have a lot of drama in them because we don't feel worthy of more. That tends to come from a lot of feminine wounding. So when you're in your wounded feminine, you tend to give away your personal power, and you tend to get involved with people who tend to be more wounded masculine, who often end up being somehow abusive. Now that may not just be physical abuse, but it may be abusive in some other way. The wounded masculine tends to be outwardly abusive. It tends to be, I want to hurt somebody else to make myself feel better. Wounded feminine energy tends to be more, I want to hurt myself because I don't feel worthy of feeling love. That tends to be the root of a lot of addiction problems. And I don't specifically have drug addiction problems. I've never actually had a substance abuse problem, but I have had really serious binge eating problems, which is not the exact same thing as a drug addiction, but it is similar in concept. For me, a lot of that was this feeling of, you know that you're gonna feel awful. You know you're gonna feel bad. You know you're gonna feel terrible after you do this, but you're gonna do it anyway. I imagine that in a lot of situations when it comes to, say, alcohol or some kind of substance, you know you're gonna feel awful when you do this thing. You know it's gonna ruin your life, hurting your health and things like that. But it's that disconnection from feeling worthy of feeling good, of feeling worthy of stopping, feeling worthy of doing the thing that you need to do in order to get help to stop it. A lot of that comes from a lack of self-worth, a lack of feeling love for yourself. So that lack of self-worth and that lack of self-love, of self-care, of that ability to feel good within yourself can very often lead to continuing an addiction even after you know that you have an addiction. And I understand that sometimes you don't necessarily know you have a problem and aren't aware that you have a problem. But I think once you get to that point where you have awareness that you have a problem, or you have awareness that something is bad, you then continue to do it because you just don't feel worthy of actually getting the help or getting the treatment. A lot of that can be a part of it. For me, I know when I was in my binge eating phase, a lot of that was like, I knew I was gonna feel awful afterwards. Like I knew I was gonna feel gross and crappy and disgusting afterwards. Like just the physical feeling in my body was gonna feel bad. But I did it anyway, and I realized that that was very much a form of self-harm. I got in a lot of negative relationships. I was like, I don't feel worthy of someone treating me well, so I'm going to get in this relationship of somebody who's constantly bad-mouthing me, is constantly putting me down, of constantly treating me badly. because I don't feel worthy of better. And I think oftentimes when we get into situations of addiction, so say you're somebody in wounded feminine energy, so you have no self-discipline, so you get involved in a lot of activities that they feel good in the moment, but you're not actually thinking about the long-term consequences of these things. So that like seeking pleasure but not having any discipline around it can actually get you involved in some of those addictions. But then that not feeling worthy of taking care of yourself, and also not having any connection to a healthy masculine energy within yourself that actually leads you to protect yourself from outside harm, because really what you're doing in most addictions is some kind of harm. You're hurting yourself in some way. It feels pleasurable in the moment, but you're not thinking long term, and you're not thinking about actually protecting yourself in the long term. Masculine structure within all of us, within ourselves, is about discipline. It's about protection. It's about structure. It's about looking at the greater purpose in life, as opposed to the feminine, which is very much about love and pleasure and connection. I've used this analogy before, that it's like, you know, if you're cooking and you cook in a very masculine way, you'll get the job done, but it might not have any flavor. Whereas if you cook the feminine way, it might have a lot of flavor and taste amazing. It may never actually get finished and get on the table. And you need both of those things together in order to make a meal. You need that masculine structure of knowing like when the meal has to be made and what the steps are. But you also want that feminine flavor of like pleasure and joy. But when those things go wrong, and when you get into your wounded feminine, so you have no connection to your inner masculine, it's actually keeping you safe and keeping you disciplined. Only have that wounded feminine of, I'll do anything for pleasure, I'll do anything for love, I'll do anything for the moment that feels good in the moment, but I'm not thinking long term. That's when you start to get into a lot of self-harming activities, and many addictions are self-harming in whatever way you're talking about. Whether it be, you know, drugs or alcohol are horrible on the body, we know that. Binge eating, which is where my experience lies, is terrible in so many ways, you know, physically on the body. All these things are terrible mentally and emotionally as well. Gambling addictions, shopping addictions, things like that. All those things start from that initial sense of needing pleasure in that moment and not ever thinking about the long-term consequences, and then becoming addicted to that constant short-term pleasure that then actually becomes harming. Like you're literally harming yourself with that short-term pleasure. Another aspect is that the feminine wants to feel full. She wants to feel the fullness of love. She wants to be filled with love and feel completely full. Many addictions fill you up. So it's like a substitute for love. Who feels like they are lacking love, whether that be the love within yourself, you feel like you're lacking love from another person, you feel empty. The feminine does not want to feel empty. That just is not. The masculine loves to feel empty. He loves to just empty himself out. It's evident if you think about it in just basic sexual biology. The masculine releases everything into the woman, and that's when he is at calm and peace, whereas the feminine wants to feel full. She wants to feel the fullness of love and feel herself being filled as much as possible, because that's, I mean, that's sort of the physical aspect of it, but that's emotionally as well. You know, the masculine wants to kind of clear everything out and come to a clear-headed state, whereas the feminine wants to feel that fullness of love. Many addictions, not all of them, but many addictions are actually about filling yourself up. You're filling yourself up with alcohol. You're filling yourself up with food. You're filling yourself up with shopping for the most stuff. As a woman in wounded feminine energy, that sexual addiction can be about constantly feeling that need to fill yourself with a person, or trick yourself into thinking that you are getting love from a person even if this person is not actually giving you love. It's like a false sense of love. Feminine energy is also emotional energy. It is about feeling your emotions, about feeling and experiencing all the range of your emotions. And if you are in wounded feminine energy, you tend to not be very comfortable with your own emotions. You're not really connected to your own emotions as much. So you tend to be ashamed of them because you don't feel like your emotions are worthy or acceptable. Maybe somebody's made you feel like your emotions weren't worthy or acceptable. Often these addictions can then become a way of numbing those emotions. Many things are numbing or a distraction. I talked about this in my Sex and the City breakdown, talking about Samantha Jones, and I really do believe that her she was a sex addict as far as I'm concerned. It was that feeling of, I don't want to feel things. She mentioned it several times in the series, if you're familiar with Sex and the City. She didn't want to feel things, so she would go out and have sex with a guy. You know, I mean, like that's a sign of addiction. Like many people become addicted because they don't want to feel what they're feeling. So they want to have some kind of substance or activity or something that stops those feelings from feeling, and that usually is having some kind of wounding or resentment in your feminine energy. That aspect can also have a sense of wounded masculine energy as well, of not feeling like you're allowed to feel your emotions and not having any connection to your feminine energy. That's where these things are not necessarily cut and dry. Some of these things can translate into masculine wounding as well. Some of these addictions do tend to show up in people who have more wounded masculine energy. If you are in your wounded masculine and you cannot connect to your feminine energy at all, and you're ashamed of your emotions in that sense, that can also come up in trying to suppress your emotions in, you know, say drinking your troubles away or things like that. That's why I don't really think you should get too caught up in labeling these things and getting into more like, what is the root of what you're dealing with, and then where can I take action from there in order for me to live the best life that I really want to live. So where do we go from here? Healing your inner masculine and your inner feminine energies are essential. If you are naturally masculine at your core, then it's ideal that you be in a healthy connection to your masculine energy most of the time, and also have access to a healthy version of your feminine energy. If you are feminine at your core naturally, it's really important that you have a really healthy connection with your feminine energy, but also have access to a healthy version of your masculine energy. And then really tapping into the places where you feel like you're dealing with wounding or traumas or things like that, getting to the root of that, and then figuring out where you need to do the healing work. What is your relationship with your feminine energy? What is your relationship with your masculine energy? What aspects of my life are addictions popping up? Where do I feel like the root cause of this is? And taking the steps necessary to work on that. There's obviously so many different avenues and so many different ways that you can heal and ways that you can work on these things, and there's so many different types of addictions and things like that. So this was just a brief overview. If you want me to do a follow-up video on any other specific topics or issues around this, I'd be more than happy to do that. If you are dealing with an addiction problem, I highly encourage you to get help in some way. Talk to somebody. Take the first step, because you are worthy of it. You absolutely are. Even if you don't feel it at all, if you don't feel that in any part of you right now, I guarantee that you are. We are all worthy of living healthy, happy lives. And I really hope that this video inspires you to take the next step in order to heal whatever parts of yourself that you feel like you need to in order to live your best life. So this was just a brief overview of the connection between wounded feminine and even wounded masculine when it comes to addiction problems. And I really hope that this video was helpful. I can dive into any of these in more specifics if you have any other questions. If you have any other questions or topic requests or things you want me to expand on this topic, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you, and I love your suggestions. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up, and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you're a woman and you want to connect with your feminine energy, I have a great beginner's course. It's called Feminine Radiance. Details are in the description box below, along with links to all my social media channels. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.